Well, let's be honest. Oil is at minus $37 a barrel. So it was kind of funny when we were discussing the separation. Kane was like, "Well, we'll waive any non-compete type issues, because we had such a good
Sure.
partnership. And if you want to go raise your own fund, go raise your own fund." And I'm sitting there staring at minus $37 oil, saying, "Well, guys, my opening position is I'll take a lifetime ban from the industry. Let's start there on my side." The thing I love about the prep is I'm sitting here looking at this going, "Oh my God, I really am having a bad hair day. This is horrible." You're
Well,
gonna edit this out, right? We're
we
not
could
gonna have
we could
this
edit
on
the whole
there.
thing out. We could just make you look like
Perfect.
Frank Sinatra. It'll be fine. I like this remote setup. Honestly, it's got you got a nice little bar there. What percentage of guests are drinking before they come on?
Boy, back in the day when we started the podcast, there was a lot of booze flowing because I used to record. I used to record in this studio down in Richmond, Texas. It was an old house. It was a guy's passion project, and he set up literally a world-class recording studio down there. And what would happen is rappers would come down at like midnight, 1 in the morning, stoned off their tails, and just go to town and rap all night. And this was kind of a saying. Had no idea this was happening at the end of my street in Richmond, Texas. But I probably recorded about the first 50 or 60 podcasts I did, the audio only ones. I did that down there, and it always felt like we had a bottle of wine or two while we were doing it.
So this thing's got to smell like it's got to smell like it's got to be smelling like weed the second you walk into that studio.
He was pretty good at making people smoke out on the porch. But he'd text periodically, and I'm kind of sworn to secrecy on this. But there were some rappers you've heard of that have been down there, and he used to give me a heads up. Hey, you might want to show up at 2 in the morning, and so I'd wander down. Yeah, it was fun. It was fun. Unfortunately, they sold the lot that the house was on. It's going to become a Starbucks.
Oh, so, yeah, just the way the world goes now.
Exactly.
That's
So now tell me what you're doing with this podcast thing. This is kind of cool.
Yeah, so I think the objective for me is a couple different things. One, it's very selfish. Like, I'd like to get better at whatever this game is, and so the only way to really do it is instead of like watching other people do it or read, I just have to like do them, right? So that's one. Number two is it feels like a podcast is a very it's like a life hack into getting conversations with people you ordinarily wouldn't. So I like this conversation because we're going to have far more rapport, but ordinarily it's much easier to get someone to sit down that would never have any interest in having lunch with you or a conversation with you if you have a podcast. And then I think the third is it's another media piece of content for my audience coming from the newsletter. And so the newsletter seems to be working from an experiment perspective, but a lot of people don't like to read, and a lot of people are consuming a lot of audio-only content or podcasts. And so the thought is we're covering a lot of news coming out of various founders or companies, startups. What if we just sort of platform those same people that we're covering some news release about and have them come on and tell their story? So that's really the first reason.
Okay, so I'm going to grade you. You're absolutely right on number one and number three. I love both of those things because, with the power of the internet today, you can push this anywhere. I've got a garbage crew, like literally take their shirts off, pick up garbage, driving around Seattle that supposedly listens to my podcast every Friday. And I wind up getting an email from them. They don't know a lot about the energy business, God bless them, but they ask really good questions.
Sure.
Hey, what'd this guy mean by this? So that's kind of cool. Supposedly, one of the nuclear submarines, the commander is, call it, 45 years old. He's got 3 years till retirement, full pension. He is a nuclear scientist, wants to get into the nuclear energy business, and was talking to somebody and said, we need an energy podcast to listen to. So I am being blasted at, 10,000 feet below the sea or whatever, weekly. And so putting your thoughts down in this kind of format, audio, video, the distribution capabilities of the internet are amazing. So I agree with you on 1 and 3. 2, you're not going to get a meeting with somebody that wouldn't go eat lunch with you. In fact, you'll kind of get the opposite. You'll get some crazies going, hey, I want to come on your podcast. You'll get this. But I think what it will do is when you have somebody on your podcast, you'll have a really interesting conversation. It'll make the bonds tighter.
Sure.
So that's my take on your number 2. You'll wind up being better friends with folks that come on.
Well, I like it. Anything to strengthen our bond, Chuck, would be phenomenal. So I'm going to do a stab.
Oh, I just felt like I got a hug. I felt like let's see if I can we just hugged. That's so great.
I know you were pushing to do this in person, but I wanted to get it out there as soon as possible so I could get you back on a year from now, sooner. So, I'll see you a week of NAPE, half of that being sober, half of that probably not. But I'm looking forward to this exact episode, call it a year from now, and seeing what that sounds like. But I want to take a stab at your background first, because for someone who's accomplished a lot, I feel like you don't brag on yourself as much. We've talked about this. It's like, generally podcast hosts are much better at being self-deprecating than they are being sort of braggadocious. So I'm going to try to stake a stab at yours. So from what I can tell, like, you completely grew up, you've never lived outside of the Houston area. You grew up in Richmond. You went to school at Rice. You joined Stevens in investment banking as, an analyst.
Hold on, real quick. Spent about 3.5 months in Austin doing a semester at the University of Texas Law School. Figured out that big, thick book, tiny print, no pictures is not my jam, so I dropped out and came back to Rice Business School. And then with Stevens, I spent 1 year in Dallas. But you're correct so far.
Okay, no. So let's go through. So when you were in law school, like, you applied, went to law school, and 3 months in just said, this isn't for me.
Full scholarship. I had a full ride from the University of Texas. Like, Chuck, you just show up. And this sounds nuts. Like, this doesn't sound like this. You like the fact that you obviously had a plan in undergrad, I assume, studied, went there, full ride, everything. 3 months doesn't feel like a long enough time horizon to be like, yeah, I'm out on this. Well, like, something had to have happened. As my ex-wife likes to say, yeah, maybe we have made this decision 2 weeks earlier before I moved there? And I'm like, yeah, fair enough.
So
I was a political science guy, always interested in politics. I managed 5 campaigns when I was an undergrad at Rice. I was going to the University of Texas Law School, and I was going to be governor of Texas. That was the career path and how to do it. And I think what actually happened is I just got burnt out by school. I probably needed a year off from school. That was one. And then number 2, I was sitting in civil procedure class, and that's basically what are the rules of court. And we went through this court case where basically they put a rule in place, and I think it was the state of Louisiana, that said you could not repossess a car unless you got a court order to do it first. And that sounds really good, doesn't it? It's like, oh, yeah, that's fair and all that. So they put that in place, and then they had, 3 months later, they looked at the data, and they were like 500 cases. In 480 of the cases, the defendant showed up and said, yeah, I didn't make my payments. And the judge went, okay, go get the car back, immediately. So there were like 20 cases, about call it 10 of them, the defendant didn't even show up. So, okay, boom. So there were like 10 cases left that just had an issue or two. Oh, we missed the payment. We did this. And it got worked out, pretty quickly and all. But what had happened is it raised the cost of a car, particularly a used car, because that's where the financing happens, right? Lower end used car. It raised them about $400 because you basically knew if you sold a car and you financed it, you were going to have to go to court to get this. And being the young, idealistic, libertarian politician, I get called on that day. Chuck, what did you think of this court case? I said it's horrific. It's basically hurting poor people, hurting their opportunity. It's going to lead to more poor people and all that. And the professor did what the professor is supposed to do, just rails on you, because that's what they do. They take the opposite side. And, so I'm sitting there bobbing and weaving, and it usually, and when you're getting chosen, you go the whole hour and a half. So I went toe to toe as best I could with all that. After class, I really expected my classmates to come up and go, oh, man, good job, way to hang in there, do your best and all that. Man, people were calling me a Nazi because I thought that somebody could just come and take your car away. And I was like, no, I just want cheaper cars. And so anyway, that really traumatized me. And I was talking to one of my best friends and I'm like going, man, this is just crazy. These people are nuts. And he goes, oh, and by the way, if you become a lawyer, they're going to be your friends for the rest of your life. And I was like, dude, I'm out. Called mom. I'm like, yeah, get dad on the phone. This is a biggie. Hey, I'm dropping out of law school. And my mom was like, my baby has a conscience. Please come home.
That's kind of crazy. One, like the fact that you remember that so vividly is nuts to me, because we're about the same age, Chuck, and I can't remember anything from college, so that's pretty nuts.
You remember when you drop out of law school? Trust me.
So you sort of have that. You kind of drop out. What is it? 12 months. And your viewpoint here is lawyers are unconscionable. So I'm going to go get an MBA because the business guys, certainly care about others a lot more.
I think it was even maybe less than that. It was just a default in, I don't know what I want to do. I mean,
Sure.
Rice is a great school. It's always in the U.S. News and World top 20. Great at teaching you to think. The education was amazing there. No practical skills.
Sure.
I used to joke I got my education at Rice and then tried my vocational training at the University of Texas. But at the end of the day, just defaulted back into business school because I didn't know what I wanted to do, figured out finance. And that was kind of when, okay, this is my jam. I want to be a banker. And then that's when I got to Stevens.
So you go Stevens, you're there for what, like almost a decade, something like that, 7, 8 years?
Yeah, 7 years.
And then
always wanted to do well, but not well enough to get promoted to Little Rock.
Yeah.
So that was my jam on that.
So the Little Rock opportunity comes up, and you're like, no, okay, now I'm going buy side. So you're joining Kane. This is like 2000, 2001-ish era.
Right. March 2001. Yeah.
And they had not had an energy fund at that time. Is that right? Like this.
They had one. They had raised Energy Fund 1 in '99, and we're in the process of raising Energy Fund 2.
Okay.
So I was the second employee.
Oh wow. Okay. And so you're there, and you grow that over 20 years, which is like insane, like sort of U.S. energy renaissance during that time, primarily as a result of shale. And then sort of public ousting ish from Kane, which we don't have to go into, or
Oh, I love that way. Public out. What did you say? Outing ish.
Ousting.
Ousting ish. Yes, there we go. I was ousted.
That's right. That's how I feel. And look, there's a couple different camps, right? Which is you could go. You're at 811 Main. You could go down the street, get office space, and say, I'm starting, Chuck Yates Fund 1. But you didn't do that.
Well, let's be honest. Oil is at minus $37 a barrel. So it was kind of funny when we were discussing the separation. Kane was like, well, we'll waive any non-compete type issues, because we had such a good
Sure.
partnership. And if you want to go raise your own fund, go raise your own fund. And I'm sitting there staring at minus $37 oil saying, well, guys, my opening position is I'll take a lifetime ban from the industry. Let's start there on my side.
So you take a little bit of time, and then you effectively start going into content creation almost instantly between Twitter. You start. I think there was a series of like YouTube videos you made. Then you had like the podcast. Then you started doing the work with Colin and Jake. Walk me through that. Was that something you wanted to do prior, and given your investment seat, you couldn't do that, or was it just, hey, I'm bored, I have some time, let me take a stab at this?
And I'd love to put together a more coherent story
Sure.
about that. But, it was so the ex wife has asthma and we're in COVID, right?
Yep.
And I took it really seriously because the kids were going back and forth. That also meant I'm by myself in Richmond,
Yeah.
Texas. And so there was a little issue of kind of going stir crazy there. Number one. Number two, and I gave a speech to the Wildcat,
Yep.
the Petroleum Alliance of Oklahoma, their first dinner back after COVID. And one of the things I said in there is every company needs to give an employee 3 months off every 2 to 3 years, literally where they can't even see their emails. You
Hmm.
truly need that break. Because the one thing that I noticed is literally 48 hours after getting fired and literally having no responsibility. I couldn't see my Kane email, all that. Man, it was like this fog just lifted from me.
Hmm.
And I could sit there and go, man, why in the hell were we doing that way? We should
Sure.
have done it this way. The clarity it kind of gives you. And so, kind of in part of that was that hit me in the face was, man, we all bury our head in the sand as energy folks, and everybody else on the planet is out leading with content. You
Sure.
go to Andreessen Horowitz's website, they're the biggest VC fund on the planet, and they look like a media company. Hey, here's our podcast where we're talking about future of gaming. Here's our white paper on the unbundling of LinkedIn, blah, 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 blah. And I just sat there and went, man, that would be really cool. And it kind of combined with my best friend has always said this. Fish has always said when people are like, "Ooh, Chuck, what does he want to do when he grows up, or what's he going to do after this?" And Fish said, since the day I met him, he wants to be a game show host. So there was kind of an element of that.
You want
So
to be
you're
Howie
right.
Mandel?
I just started blowing up. I started blowing up Twitter, and
Yeah.
and kind of my personality in life has always been you just own something and be really self-deprecating about it, and you take the weapon out of somebody's hand,
Yeah.
you know. And so instead of like drafting a story of Chuck is left to pursue other opportunities, it's like, nah, you fired me. It's good. Let's just, I'm going to own that I got fired, and I'm going to go talk about it, and I'm going to make fun of myself a lot, and then nobody has a weapon they can use against you.
Sure. And so you gave that speech at I missed that first one. The most recent one you did was along the same lines around content and trying to encourage employees at some of these big companies to pump out some content. And you certainly sort of led by example on that front. What do you think? Do you think any differently than that talk? I forget what it was, like a few months ago now.
Yeah, no, but I mean, you and I should be hammering home this message every chance we get to people is I think what happens in a vacuum is the other side fills up. And so what I mean by that is we're not out telling our story. We're not showing how cool oil and gas is. We're not showing about the great things we do. We sit around in the echo chamber and we quote facts, figures, and reasons to each other, high five each other,
Hmm.
and it doesn't change any one person's mind out there on the planet. And if we could figure out a way to connect on an emotional level with people outside, we might actually be able to win some battles out there and not have, in effect, the environmentalists, the anti hydrocarbon people win every single
Hmm.
battle. And And kind of the example I gave at the Petroleum Alliance launch, and I'm going to give it here, is I just opened Zoom rooms. This was, I think, 2 years ago, just all summer. I said, hey, I'm going to be in a Zoom room from 10 to noon every day this week. And I was blasting this out on Twitter and LinkedIn. I said, just come join me if you're under 25 and you went into energy or you didn't go into energy. Mm-hmm. And it was great, man. I probably talked to 50 to 75 people that were just popping in. And the story that really nailed it home to me is a Canadian engineer calls me up and he goes, or he's on the Zoom room. And he goes, Chuck, you know what it is? He goes, and I'll just use the name, Suncor. Suncor would come to university. They'd send an old 55-year-old white guy. I was a little offended because I am 55. Pretty pasty too, I might add. But anyway, he's like, and the title would be Extracting Oil and Gas.
Sure.
And 10 people would show up. 30 minutes into the hour presentation, 6 or 7 people had left. And that was it. And he said that happened freshman, sophomore, and junior year. He said senior year, they sent a 27-year-old Indian engineer who had studied, gone to college in India, had moved to Canada to get this job. And the title of the presentation was Utilizing AI to Image the Subsurface. And everybody went, wow, that sounds really cool. So 200 people show up for this presentation. And the guy's down there full of enthusiasm. His opening line was something to the effect of, holy crap, I've never talked to this many people in my life. And he starts running through a product demo and he's bouncing around. Supposedly by the end of the presentation, 400 people are in there and they stay for 2 hours afterwards and he talks to all of them. It was basically the same presentation.
Exactly.
All this young guy did was connect on an emotional level and talk about how cool it was. Sure. And the like. And so my point in telling that story is Suncor signed up one engineering hire, maybe 2 each year. That last year they got 25 or something ridiculous. We're not that far off. All we have to do is tell our stories. And when I was at that speech at the Petroleum Alliance and I was talking about this, I basically got the question of, oh yeah, but you know, some employee's going to do something stupid and destroy everything. And I went back and I said, you know, we're trusting people with enough pressure that they could literally blow up a small town in Oklahoma. Mm-hmm. You know, we're trusting them with that. I think we can trust them with an iPhone. And if you really think about it, if you have the right people, you have the right culture, and you have the right training, you can trust people to document what they're doing. And I'll tell you this, there's a whole thing on TikTok of oil field workers and, you know, Colin McClellan, CEO here of Digital Wildcatters, filmed a video on just how a drill bit works. Yeah. Like nothing super scientific. It got 1 million views in the first week. So I think the more and more we do this, the more and more we do this as an industry, the more people go, wow, that's pretty cool. I want to learn more about it.
No, I think it's a good frame. So I think there was really 2 takeaways from, because I was there when you went through the lunch, and I think you said, you know, I won't do the Indian accent because and you know, I said afterwards to you and Brooke, I said, go ahead and do it. You know, the one Indian guy in the room doesn't mind.
My Indian accent is way too much watching The Simpsons. So there's I would be canceled tomorrow if I tried that. So you can't bait me into it.
Well, definitely not for the podcast. You come back to OKC for the luncheon. I don't think it's going to be an issue. It's not recorded anyway. But I think my takeaway was it's a 2 millimeter shift. Right, so it's kind of like when you're hitting the golf ball, you know, 2 millimeters, and that has a profound impact on what's going to be the end result. And that was the same thing with the Suncor example, right? Which is more or less the exact same presentation. You had a speaker who was much younger, so easier to relate to, which is, hey, I'm in college. You are someone that I could be 5-10 years from now. You could see that path a little easier. And then 2 was you're just creating an example which is far more relevant for today, right? And it's going to resonate with that audience. So I think that 2 millimeter shift can be applied to a lot of stuff when you're thinking about trying to recruit younger people. In fact, was probably a lot cheaper for the organization too to send someone younger and get out there and see what might be relevant for them.
No, that's exactly right, and I like the way you frame it because the way I tried to say instead of the 2 millimeter shift was I said if one person
Mm-hmm.
will record something, post it on Instagram, and 6 people watch it, that's 6 more people than we
Yep.
had yesterday.
Right.
And just the compounding effect of that. Because one of the things I've learned, and I joke that I'm a social media influencer. That's my job now. I'm a
You're what the kids
celebrity.
want to be when they grow up, right? Because the number one sort of job is YouTuber or influencer.
Well, it was so great because the girlfriend and the daughters all have the same reaction when somebody comes up and wants to take a selfie. It's like, oh, good God,
Right.
are you kidding me? Yeah,
It's
but
actually kind of fascinating, right? Like we talked about this a little bit, which is people who you've never met will listen to your podcast episodes, and I'm sure you feel the same way about other podcasts you listen to. Which is if you listen to enough of them, they're like your friend. You like, I think there's something interesting about podcasts, which is like, okay, generally listen to audio only. They're in my ear. I'm like driving somewhere or whatever it is. I've heard enough conversations where I feel like that person is my friend. I've never met this person. I've never interacted with this person. Never interacted with them even via Twitter or something like that. But they feel like they're your friend. And I suspect that is why so many people come up to you and are like, "Hey, I listen to your stuff, and like you're my buddy now." It's like this weird social experiment we now have where we're friends with people that we've never met.
well, and I'm writing a speech right now about how do we go recruit young people,
Sure.
and that's one of the key points I make in there is kids grew up today and they're just digitally native.
Yep.
They meet people on Twitter. They don't know the person's name because they're anonymous. They
Sure.
interact through direct messages. They interact online in front of everybody, and you literally build these close relationships, and you may never have met the person. It was funny. I was going to New York with the girlfriend, and she had some meetings she was going to go do, and she goes, "What are you doing this afternoon?" I said, "Well, I'm going to get a drink." And she goes, "Who with?" And I go, "It's a guy named Frankie Four Fingers." And she's like, "You can't go get a drink with Frankie Four." She goes, "Who is he?" And I have no idea. Frankie Four Fingers. And so we wound up meeting for a drink, had a delightful time. And I'm really good with anonymity on Twitter. I keep the secret. So he or she was delightful, and we chatted, and a prominent person, and
Yep.
it was fun. But that is the norm with kids.
I think that's the norm. On EFT, I was actually shocked because I think the viewpoint for a lot of people who aren't on Twitter or on EFT, which like I have sort of avoided a lot of that in the last year and a half or so, is the viewpoint is these are all people who are really young, but it's actually quite the opposite. Like it's actually really a lot of really seasoned people in the industry that are using an anonymous handle in my like short period of time messaging there, and I've always been shocked to see that actually. That was like pretty frame breaking for me.
I've had a couple of dinners where I show up and go, "No fucking way, really?
Yep.
It's you?" And you get the, "Yeah, it's me," and I'm like, "Man, we've been doing direct messages
Yep.
forever." Yeah.
Yep. No,
So
that's right. So, one topic that we talked about a while back, which is in line with your content idea, was the concept of a chief content officer at a private equity fund. So, obviously, you have a long-standing understanding of how to build a very good fund over the last 20 years. But it feels like, from your point of view, for the next, call it decade or two, energy private equity ought to have a chief content officer. What do you think that looks like?
So this is what's so crazy is you'll it's almost like energy private equity has isolated itself from the whole rest of the world. and you go have a beer, dinner, lunch with anyone in energy private equity, and how is it? Oh man, fundraising's so hard. It's so
Yeah.
horrible. We had, for the longest time, we had the green and the red problem. A lot of losses.
Yeah.
Environmental stuff is the green. Performance has been a lot better because prices have come back. So maybe the red issue is fading, but we still have the green issue, and it's just tough. There's not any money available. And I'm always like, well, show me your content. And they're like, oh, we can't. We can't put any content out there. People will criticize us. And then I go, okay. And I'm not really a very smart guy, but I do go, okay, who's the biggest out there? And you go look at Carlisle, KKR, and I'm going to get, of these big guys, 3 out of the 4 of them, you pull up their websites and they look like media companies,
Yeah.
and they're all talking content. And what I mean by content is it can be a white paper, it can be a podcast, it can be a video clip, it can be, in effect, mini movies, whatever the case may be. And if you make this and it's authentic and it's real, because man, people today can sniff through it.
Yep.
If you write a script and you get posed here and you put filters on, everybody's like, I'm not watching that stuff.
Sure.
If you get real with folks and they can tell it's truly you, and I got a great stat for you in just a second that proves this point, then if you're perceived as a thought leader, if you're perceived as someone that knows what's going on, if you're perceived, I think you have to be vulnerable too. I think people have to go, okay, that's a real person. I'm going to trust them. And the like, you literally can turn your life today from outbounds of let's put a book together and let's go to New York and fundraise with 10 different meetings to people reaching out to you and say, hey, I want to learn more about this, And energy private equity hasn't done it. I will give them this. I will give them credit for this. 3 years ago, they were like, why in God's name are you doing a podcast? And will you please stop telling people how management fees are calculated? I said, hey, whatever. And then, kind of 2 years ago, it was, hey, dude, I listened to that podcast you did. That was really good. I like that. I learned something, blah, blah, blah. About a year ago, it got into, hey, why don't we go grab a beer and chat about this stuff? And I would say in the last 6 months, I've talked to a lot of people in the industry that are like, okay, get serious here. How would you actually do this? And like with most things energy, we're probably about 10 years behind the rest of the world in doing this. And let me throw kind of one thing out on content that I think is really important. And it comes to this whole concept of you got to be genuine, you got to be authentic. Name the 3 most trusted news sources in America. Put you on the spot here.
It's a good question. I mean, trusted news sources. I don't, my suspicion is America probably thinks they're probably like the big 3 news channels. I don't probably agree with that, but that's probably what this stat is.
Okay, so you're going there. Actually, if you look at the 3 most trusted news sources in America, and this is not in order, they all rank about the same. Oprah Winfrey, Howard Stern, and Joe Rogan.
Wow. Okay. Well,
I mean, and everybody in the energy business goes, oh my God, you can't say that, you'll be canceled. Howard Stern has said everything horrifically.
I mean, that's right.
Incredibly well trusted because he's authentic. He's real. That's who he is. Also, as good an interviewer as we've got. Sure. He gets celebrities to tell you stuff that they don't tell to anyone else. Same thing with Rogan. Rogan's very thoughtful, smart guy, very authentic, tells you what he's thinking and things. I mean, and obviously he's done all his jokes that should theoretically get people canceled, but they don't. Right. I mean, Oprah's a little bit of a different person, but at the same time, I mean, she publicly talked about losing her virginity at 12 years old so she could get a popsicle. I mean, so that's not Walter Cronkite. Sure. But at the same time, because they're authentic, they've garnered trust with their audience, and that's why they rank, in the top 3. And so anybody thinking about content and using that as a form of leverage to create inbounds for yourself, you got to be real.
Yeah.
You got to be real, because if you're not, and what's interesting is what's real for me is not what's real for you. I
Sure.
mean, I'm self-deprecating. I've had a lot of therapy. I'm actually happy to share all that kind of stuff because I don't want you to make a mistake I've made. I already paid the price. Don't want you to deal with it. But that may not be you, you know?
Sure.
Other people are like, no, I'm the funny guy. I'm the really, really smart, thoughtful guy. It's got to be authentic. It's got to be you because people see through it.
Yeah.
That's
I
my
mean,
soapbox. I'm off my soapbox now.
I think the concept makes all the sense in the world, right? Which is if you're in the investment business, you have a handful of stakeholders, right? One is you have founders or management teams you want to attract. What percentage of management teams were you chasing relative to inbounds when
Yeah,
you?
no, that was right because most management teams we were chasing, because if you think
Yeah,
about energy private equity, I think they talk about the 97 firms because it was like
yeah,
Quantum, Incap moved over doing private equity as opposed to Mez and 90.
yeah,
Everybody kind of in those late 90s. NGP had started around there, and Kane had started with Bob Sanat sitting in Los Angeles saying, if someone's so desperate, they'll come to Los Angeles to see me. I'm going to put really harsh terms in front of them. And if I get them, great. If I don't,
sure.
I'll go to
Yeah,
the beach club or whatever. And when we opened the Houston office and started having to compete every day with NGP, NCAP, and the like, we were chasing. I mean,
yeah,
we were definitely behind. And two, that was part of the hoodie thing. I mean, one, it's just my personality. I'd rather wear a
sure.
hoodie than a suit any day. But I think Bob Sanat at some point really got this to his credit. There was some method to the madness in that if you want somebody to wear a suit and tie to your board meeting, why wouldn't you choose Quantum, NCAP, NGP? If you want kind of a weirdo whose business partner, Mike Hines, is a great reservoir engineer, if you want those guys in your board meeting and generally speaking would be more user friendly, I mean, we said no when we had to say no, but at the end of the day, well, actually, one of the greatest quotes I ever said, and I'll name the CEO because I love the dude to death. Barry Mullinex used to call
Yep.
from Panther, and he would beat me up all the time. Chuck, we need to do this, blah, 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 blah. And I told him one time, I said, hey, Barry, every time I say no, it's just that much easier next time. But so a little bit of kind of the caricature of Chuck Yates was to give us a little bit of a leg up to chase those
Sure.
teams. Eventually, then you get into the game of you just need to keep the teams you like.
Yep.
So it's about and then towards later in life, we were getting inbounds of, hey, we heard great things about you about this. We
Exactly.
think you'd really fit. So,
I
yeah,
think
no, it was interesting.
Yeah, someone said the other day that you were a micro celebrity. I thought that was a
A
fascinating
micro.
term, which is, I hope you find that flattering. I think they meant it in a flattering way. But what I think is this concept of known well versus well known. So, for example, I like Tom Cruise is very well known. Like everyone knows who Tom Cruise is. However, I couldn't tell you three things about his personality, what he's into, and what he's not. Like I just can't do that. I'm not sure I've watched enough interviews or whatever. But you're known well. And so I think when you walk me through that chief content officer concept, I thought that was the exact same, sort of unique edge, which is if I'm an investor, I don't necessarily need to be well known. That's actually irrelevant. I don't need everyone to know my name. I just need the right audience to know me very well. Here's what I'm willing to invest in. Here's how I do it. Here's what I won't invest in. And that sort of resonates with three different stakeholders, right?
And have some intensity about it, i.e., they
100%.
really, really like me.
Right.
Yeah,
Yes.
I'll take 20 management teams that love me if the other
Bingo.
500 hate me.
You
Yeah,
have to piss
good.
some
Yeah,
people off, or you're not really, drawing some hard line, right? And that's just kind of how that goes. And so you sort of LP stakeholders, which you're trying to attract people who agree with your sort of thesis or what your firm is about. You have founders and management teams that you're chasing, not the ones that are coming in because they just need capital, for example. And then you're also trying to attract the best investment professionals, right? So you're also trying to attract, in a lot of ways, okay, great. If I'm a rock star investment banking analyst at Goldman in my second year and I have my pick of the litter of funds, which is the one that I align with, not just the one who, sort of pays me the most or whatever the case may be.
No, it's always about the money. But anyway.
So one of the things that we sort of talked about was if you were, if we sort of went back in time and you were like 25 again, either on the investment professional side or on the founder side, what would you be thinking about? What are the business plans, opportunities, markets that you'd be kind of excited about?
So kind of, I'm going to pull something back
Sure.
in. We were talking about this speech I'm going to give and how do we recruit
Yep.
young people. And some of the things I've noticed about young people hanging around being this celebrity, micro celebrity. I'm so glad. I'm so glad you were not making any sort of reference to any body part when you said micro there. I was like, please don't let him say that. No, so I like micro celebrity. But one of the things I've noticed about quote unquote the kids, we talked about being digitally native. I've seen they're very, very collaborative. Kids today like to work together. I'll give a quick story about my daughter Sarah.
Mm-hmm.
She was 8 years old. Her soccer team was up 8-0 in a game. She went and grabbed the ball, and my daughter Sarah will run the world one day. We don't know if for good or for evil, but we do know she's going to run the world. She grabs the ball and she's marching down towards the goal, and the ref is, another dad, and he's like, "Hey Sarah, can I get the ball?" And she said, "No." And he looked at me, and I'm like, "Dude, I don't know." Well, anyway, Sarah went and put the ball in front of the goal and had the other team line up, and they all took turns scoring goals, the other team. And all the girls were just cheering and hugging because everybody was getting a goal. And there was a dad that kind of wanted to stop it, and everybody's like, "Dude, they're 8. We're not playing professional soccer." But Sarah came off and said, "Well, I wanted them to have some goals too." And I tell that funny story because kids are very, very collaborative today. The other thing about them too is their fulfillment comes from way more than just a paycheck.
Yep.
Back I think when I was young, your sense of self-worth as a man was how big is my paycheck, whose name is on the business card, and maybe the achievements of my son playing football. And that was it. And kids today don't. So actually, you asked me what I would be doing as a young person is I actually like the fact that kids kind of think that way. And so, what would I be doing? Go find something you love.
Yep.
Totally find something you love, get into it. Because, like, literally, there are people today living in their mother's basement that figure out they like rental storage units. And they start writing about it every day.
Mm-hmm.
They start studying the industry. They're talking to people. They're quoting rates and stuff. 10 years later, they've got a $2 billion fund investing in this. That's kind of this power of everything we've been talking about. Content, being a thought leader, turning your life from outbounds to inbounds. So go find something you love, study the hell out of it, push content out, and at the end of the day, believe it or not, you're gonna laugh at this, but I would love to tell my 25-year-old self, dude, don't worry about what other people think.
Yep.
You just shouldn't. Life's so short. And the other thing I will say to kids today that I truly, truly believe, and this is not meant to be condescending, this is not meant to in any way being dismissive of the anxiety you're feeling. Everybody that's 22 years old has just tons of anxiety. I promise you this, at age 55, I have no idea what I was anxious about when I was 22.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't mean it's not real for you, but I promise you it goes away. It goes away. So, and I know you want kind of more specific, so I'll give you one. A problem I see right now, but I don't have a good solution for it,
Mm-hmm.
is 1950 to 2000, the usage of electricity in America went up about 15x. We created a lot of cool stuff that ran off electricity. Everything from refrigerators, air conditioning, the computer, etc. We just had all this, boom, a lot more electricity, right? 2000 to about today, power usage, electricity usage hadn't really grown much. It's
Not
been
flat.
pretty
Yeah.
flat. It's been flat. And what happened during that last kind of 20-ish years was really the machines got a lot more efficient.
Yep.
Lighting has become amazingly efficient. I think we're using over the last decade 10x the computing power up in the cloud, and we're only using 10% more electricity to power it. The
Right.
machines have just gotten so that game's done.
Yep.
I mean, I think the head of MISO was on Maynard Holt's podcast. He was talking about we used to have 15% excess generating capacity. Now we're lucky if we got 2. We've all seen the problems with ERCOT. For all the griping about ERCOT, it's just a leading indicator. ERCOT happens first, and everybody else catches up on it. You talk to Elon Musk, I think he's at 3x the power by 2045. Goldman Sachs, I think, is at 2.5. McKinsey's at 2x. I think even PG&E's at 1.7x. Bottom line is we're going to need a whole lot more power. And when I sit there and look at it as an energy guy, 5 guys in a rusty pickup truck doubled production of oil in America, because we gripe, it's so hard to drill, the government's so bad. No, it's not. You can go drill a well in Texas in 5 days,
Far easier than any of these renewable projects.
Totally, and
it's counterintuitive.
You just put a tank out there. Put the oil
right.
in the tank. You can put it in a truck. It may cost money, but you can get anywhere. We can't do that with electricity.
No.
Electricity is generation. Then you got to have transmission. It's got to be all in sync. The grid has literally moving pieces to it. So this is a really, really, really hard problem. And I've been thinking a lot about it, but I'm not sure how you make money out of that. But boy, the person that solves that's going to be a billionaire.
It's an interesting thought, right? Because over the last 20 years, we continue to grow oil and gas production. That's clear. But if electricity in the United States has been relatively flat, and it's not permissionless, like you said, I think the example you gave of 5 guys in a pickup truck is a really good one. You need a big checkbook in oil and gas. I think that's like the barrier of entry outside of like knowledge. But the fact that there were funds that were like, oh, okay, like I like your business plan. Here's $100 million. Go drill up a bunch of oil and gas wells, and like hopefully we make money on this business plan. You don't need permission from anyone else outside of, okay, we went and got the leases, we went and got the mineral owners, the permits are really easy to get. You go play that exact same tape in power gen, wherever you play in that stack, it's far harder. It's not permissionless, right? You need to make it all of the pieces need to be there. And you're like, okay, I'm lucky. I'm the lucky one who gets to put this little last piece here, and we can generate a return. Really, really hard to do.
Well, and it's I like it that I like your term of permissionless, because I think that's a really good way of putting it, because transmission lines, I mean, there are lines that were permitted or were starting the permitted process 20 years ago, and still haven't gotten permitted because there's a snail darter here, snail darter there. And so, I mean, there are multiple stages of permission. It's like mom, dad, grandma, uncle, and aunt. This isn't hey, dad, mom said it was all right. Mom, dad said it was all right. You can't do that in electricity.
And what's really tough for, I think, most people is if you come from a frame of oil and gas and then you start looking at like renewable type projects, we universally hate them. And the reason why is we're used to taking a lot of risk, but also potentially receiving a commiserate reward. Like we know there's goose egg risk on certain business plans, but there's also 4 or 5x risk. Like there's a way to sort of make a portfolio that works. When I look at a lot of this, sort of power, renewables, whatever, and I'm lumping a lot of categories together, but the simplifying assumption is 80% of the time you're like, whoa, we're actually taking quite a bit of risk here, and there is just no return. Like when your Excel model shows you a single digit return, that's really bad, because the Excel model is usually, 4x higher than what the actual is, right? So if the Excel math doesn't look very good, there's just no way you can touch it. Now, if you were not spoiled by coming from the oil and gas industry and looking at those returns, or at least those base case returns, then you have a different frame of reference. But when your frame of reference is, I used to have 5 guys and we could go drill wells, and here's our band of outcomes, and we don't need to rely on a lot of other outside factors to be successful other than the price of oil and nat gas, which is like a big if. Here you're like, I need 12 other things to go my way and all these big companies to play ball with me. It gets really challenging.
Well, it was really interesting. I had a fellow on the podcast, call it 2 or 3 years ago, um, Robert Smith. I don't know
Yep.
if you ever met him. He worked for John Donovan, and I always had to say, not the guy from The Cure, young finance guy, but he talked about all these renewable projects being, it's so dependent on interest rates,
Yep.
and they only work today because interest is in effect free.
Yep.
And yeah, at 8 and 9%, that's a whole different game. And he was right
Right.
about that. And so, as the investor quantifying your risk, I wonder how many of those investment memos said risk number one is the Fed.
Yep. No, that
You know,
look, I think you're seeing the outcome today, right? So, look, there's a lot of Schadenfreude in our industry from stuff, which I don't think is necessarily right, but it is what it is. We're human beings, right? So we have to pick teams. And so a lot of the like call it offshore wind projects have all been scrapped or like they haven't worked out or people have pulled out of them. And it's almost like obvious, right? Because if you agreed to these projects 5 years ago at a certain cost structure and a certain interest rate, and now you're looking at them today, they look horrible, right? Because inflation has made the cost structure go up 50%, let's say, and interest rates are much higher, right? So like your rents haven't changed either. And these are like utility sort of projects ultimately, right? So you're sort of beholden to consumers saying, hey, I don't want to pay more money.
back to your permission thing. The
That's right.
PUC sitting there saying you have to have my permission to charge the
Bingo.
consumers more.
That's
Yeah,
right. Well, and the
it's
deal was
crazy.
cut 5 years ago, right? So
Yeah,
obviously it's not going to work today, right? Any logical business person would be like, okay, we cut a deal 5 years ago. Here was the cost. Here's what you were going to pay me, and here was the interest rate. Well, the interest rate is now 5x higher. The costs are 50 to 75% higher, and I'm not going to get paid any differently. And oh, by the way, I was going to generate a 12% return anyway, originally. It's sort of obvious that project's going to get scrapped, right? And so for me, the challenge has been what are projects within this category that are still economic today. Like I think the sustainability thing, the ultimate thing is it needs to be sustainable from a capitalist perspective. Otherwise, it's just not going to happen, right? And
right.
I think there are segments of it that are super interesting, but it is challenging today. It is challenging. And the lower that nat gas and oil are, it's actually even harder, right? Because you're competing
Right.
against the like it's actually sort of strange, right? Which is, this stuff is interesting when oil is $150 or nat gas is $7 because you're like, oh, I'm going to create this competing technology, but it is impossible to compete with these commodities today because they're effectively free.
So one thing along those lines that I've learned about the business that I think is really important, and I wish my 22-year-old self knew this, is if you think about energy, if we were starting from scratch, the energy delivery system would look nothing like it looks
Yep.
today.
Right.
And the thing you have to realize is the energy delivery system that we have today has been paid for.
Yep.
So things that utilize the existing technology or the existing infrastructure generally have that lower marginal cost,
Hmm.
i.e., because the last barrel, the last molecule, whatever. And you need to think through technologies that utilize that as opposed to scratch.
Yep.
Hey, we're going to just run the world on hydrogen. Okay, that's great. But we got to think about what pipelines already built can we use for that,
Hmm.
and the like. And I think that I think that gets lost on so many people outside of Houston, Texas. Well, we'll just put windmills here, and you're like, okay, that's 250 miles of transmission lines.
Yeah. Yep.
You really have to think of energy like that. And I wish that's the one kind of disappointing thing you have about the world. You wish you could have those thoughtful conversations about that instead of just being demagogued about it. Because at the end of the day, for all the people that are going to die in 5 years, according to Greta, because of global warming, people die today when there's not enough fertilizer. People die today when there's not enough heating, or heating is expensive in the winter. And so really thinking through, okay, you got this big huge jigsaw puzzle or this big huge water balloon. How do we get stuff that works inside it? We need to be way more thoughtful on, because at the end of the day, we just don't have that much money, not
Yeah, that's right.
unlimited.
That's right. I mean, look, I think there's been this giant dividend that has more or less been paid by the U.S. shale gas industry, right? That has powered a lot
I
of.
tweet out I tweet out all the time that Amazon and their vans ought to pay to plug all the wells. They're the ones that benefited from it.
Well, I mean, look, there's an element of that. I think it's phenomenal. Like, cheap nat gas in this country is incredibly flourishing for everybody, right? It's not great if you want to be a shareholder of some of these companies and you're like, hey, like, yeah, $2 is a little cheap. Can we go to $3? Unfortunately, there's no, like, they can't pass that on. But it's a huge dividend to everybody, right? We can stay warm whenever it's cold outside, and it doesn't break the bank, relatively speaking. And on an inflation-adjusted basis, like, this stuff is free compared to 20 years ago, which was kind of nuts.
Yeah, and we can build stuff.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
So when you think about, let's assume you were in your investment seat again. And if I sort of give a broad characterization, let's say you're not a Kane, but you're at an equivalent or something. Now all of these guys have raised some sort of transition-related fund, sustainable infrastructure, areas where oil and gas companies can sort of play in transition. Are there any like themes or sort of management teams you'd be looking for? Like how would you think through deploying capital in what is sort of a new category, let's say, for you historically?
Yeah, and that's really interesting because in effect I've been in that dynamic, right?
Right.
For the last 3.5 years. I theoretically could have gone and started my own fund. And you know what? Since I actually didn't try and failed, I'll hold my belief that I could actually have gotten it done. The issue I have is when I look at these new businesses and these new opportunities, it just always comes back to a government subsidy of some
Yep.
sort.
Yep.
And that's just always scared me in one
Sure.
way, shape, or form, because the government that gives can take away. I know some people that have done a really good job of finding niches that actually make money.
Hmm.
I just haven't been able to. I haven't been able. I kind of sit there and I look at the Merc and I go, gosh, which of these going to make money? Haven't really seen that. And then when you look at oil and gas, I don't even know how to tell anybody to make money in oil and gas these days. I mean, it seems like we know where all the acreage is.
Hmm.
It seems like it's fairly priced and all that. The one thing I will say is somebody's going to figure it out and make a lot of money. They
Yeah.
really are. This is just a big, huge, massive industry. If you spend enough time focused on some point of it, you can always make it more efficient and you can extract value from yourself to do it. So, where I didn't give anybody an answer, I would also tell every kid on the planet, you ought to come study energy. It's
Hmm.
big, it's huge, it's not going away. We burn more wood today than we ever have in the history of the planet for fuel. We've never had a transition except maybe away from whale blubber. And but we're burning more coal today than we've ever burned before. This is a big, huge, massive opportunity. There's going to be a lot of ways to make money here if you study it with fresh eyes. and then come on the podcast and tell me about it, you know?
Sure. Well, okay, good. I know we're coming up on time. Is there anything you want to share on what you're working on? What sort of folks you want connecting with you, and then how to best get in front of you?
I think my cell phone's on LinkedIn. My direct messages are open, so feel free to call, text, whatever. If I don't want to talk to you, I just won't respond. Has always been. So no, people I like hearing from. I didn't think I was going to relish being the old guy because I
Yeah.
was always the youngest guy in every meeting, and then at some point, I think it was Silver Hill. We had our first board meeting with those guys. I looked around, and my partner Mike Hines wasn't in the meeting with me. And I went, "Wow, I'm the old guy." But I really relish being the old guy, so I'm happy to. I'm always happy to tell you what I think about stuff. I'm wrong a whole bunch. That's kind of number one. Number two, I'd love everybody to go check out Digital Wildcatters. I think everybody kind of knows who it
Yep.
is. I come into the office every day here, even though I'm not an employee, just because I figure that's better than day drinking at my
That's right.
house. That would
College
that
pushing to
wouldn't
work.
end well. But yeah, so at Digital Wildcatters, we publish 10 podcasts. We have live events. Our Energy Tech Nights are great. It's kind of WWE meets
Yep.
Shark Tank. We have a really cool Bitcoin mining conference for the energy business, specifically for oil and gas folks. And then we've got a knowledge sharing app, Collide, that we're really excited about. To say we've launched a beta version is probably too strong, but the beta version's coming soon. We're getting a lot of good feedback. It's going to be cool. It's going to be a knowledge share.
Hmm.
So you're going to be able to go there, talk to peers. Right now, you do that on Twitter, LinkedIn, and that conversation you had about what drill bit to use was great, and it goes away. You can't find it again. Those conversations are going to be stored, indexed, searchable, so you can do that. We've got an AI driven search engine for a lot of our proprietary content as well as others. So think of kind of the Google for the energy business. That's really cool. We've got a jobs board on it. And so, the goal is hopefully in 5 years from now, every energy professional, whether it's renewables, oil and gas, is on Collide, and we're all just geeking out about energy. And hopefully the whole world will share in it and feel better about energy, or maybe it'll just be the biggest echo chamber on the planet. And I can go from micro to semi celebrity. Can I
Semi.
do that?
I'm excited about what you guys are working on. I think the industry is better off that you guys are out there, even if you ever publish or Colin or Jake publishes a tweet and then someone doesn't agree with. I'm grateful you guys are out there doing what you're doing, and I think if you put the time horizon even longer than 5 years, and you sort of think you're in the first inning of your content library today, and that's going to compound over the next decade or two, I think it's going to be insane what's going to be in there. And for example, like I think it's kind of crazy to me that whatever was being done 10 or 20 years ago in our industry, it's just not documented or searchable or easy
It's
to
lost.
sort of go through. It's a more or less loss. Like the effort required to make it ascertainable is just way too high. No one's going to do it. And so
one
now,
of the greatest one of the greatest board meetings ever. We were talking about drilling a vertical well,
yep,
and the 28-year-old drilling engineer who had drilled 750 wells in his career
yep,
was looking puzzled. And Mike Hines goes, "What's the matter?" And he goes, "Well, I've never actually drilled a vertical well. I've only drilled horizontal." And Mike was like, same thing. You get to a point and then just stop. But it's crazy. I mean, people cannot drill traditional
no,
straight holes.
no,
God forbid they deviate a little. Oh
that's
my
right,
gosh.
that's right.
Yeah. So,
Well,
hey, one
sure.
last thing, if I can get back up on my soapbox, because I think this is
Yep.
the most important thing I can say to people, and I truly, truly mean this a lot. We have been through craziness over the last 5 years. I mean, we have seen oil go to minus 37. We saw what, half the industry get fired. We saw
Yeah.
pay cuts.
More
We did all that.
consolidation.
It's
Yeah.
more consolidation. It's been just crazy. Look, at the end of the day, we all have mental health problems. We just do. And I'm number one on that. I'm going to see my therapist every Friday like I do. shame hates words. So
Mhm.
when you're feeling bad, the only way you can get rid of that is to talk to somebody else. And it sucks, particularly for men. We're just not wired this way because
Yeah.
we fix things and all. But I will tell you that 99% of the time, the person you choose to tell what you're feeling, what you're going through, why you feel so bad, will counter with, "Hey, man, me too. I
Mhm.
uh, I had this going on," and we just have to do that, folks. We really do. It's too stressful a time not to do it. My DMs are always open. Happy to take calls at 3 in the morning. But you're not in this alone, and it's not the end of the world if a bunch of guys share our feelings with each other and hug each other. It's really not.
No, for sure. I appreciate you putting that plug, and I think it's really well said. And my hope is, um, on that note, I think you're generally calling folks and asking for advice is almost like the advice you would give yourself. You just need someone else to give it to you, or you need to give it to somebody else to recognize it. So I appreciate you sharing that too.
That's a great way of saying it because a lot of times when I'm talking to somebody, I say, "What would you tell your best friend?" And they always say, "Oh, just get over it, dude. Move on." I'm like, "All right, there we go."
There you go.
Yeah,
That's right. That's right. Well, Chuck, I'll catch you in a week or two, and then I will. I think I see Colin and Jake tonight, so I'll tell him you said hey, and I will tell him you were Johnny on the spot with your phone
there
call
we go.
on Collide. Yeah,
There we go. Hey, appreciate you having me on. I look forward to a year from now when we do it again.
absolutely. Good to see you. Take
See
care.
ya.